Sarah Chen had always believed that dedication would be rewarded. For 12 years, she had walked through the sliding glass doors of St. Mary's Hospital every morning at 6:30, her white sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum floors. She knew every corner of the cardiac unit, every patient's story, and every doctor's coffee preference. The hospital had become more than her workplace, it had become her second home. On that Tuesday morning in March, Sarah arrived earlier than usual. The parking lot was still mostly empty, save for a few cars belonging to the night shift staff who would soon be heading home. She sat in her old Honda Civic for a moment, watching the sun rise behind the hospital's towering facade. Something felt different today, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. The administrative email had arrived 3 weeks ago, buried among dozens of other routine messages about policy updates and staff meetings. Budget restructuring initiative, it had said. Personnel adjustments necessary. Sarah had skimmed through it quickly, assuming it was just another corporate directive that wouldn't affect her directly. After all, she was one of the most experienced nurses in the cardiac unit. Her patients loved her, her colleagues respected her, and her supervisors had always praised her work. As she walked through the hospital corridors that morning, Sarah greeted the familiar faces she had come to know over the years. Maria, the cleaning lady who always had a warm smile despite her early morning shift. Dr. Rodriguez, who had been treating heart patients for nearly as long as Sarah had been caring for them. Janet, the young nurse who had started just 6 months ago and still looked to Sarah for guidance on the more challenging cases. "Morning, Sarah," Dr. Rodriguez called out as she passed the nurse's station. "Mrs. Patterson in room 314 was asking for you yesterday evening. She said you were the only one who could help her understand her medication schedule." Sarah smiled and nodded. Mrs. Patterson was an elderly widow who had been admitted for heart surgery 2 weeks ago. She was scared, confused, and had no family nearby to support her. Sarah had spent extra time with her each day, explaining the procedures in simple terms and holding her hand when the fear became too overwhelming. "I'll check on her first thing," Sarah replied, hanging her coat in the small locker that had been hers for over a decade. The metal door had a few dents from years of use, and she had taped a small photo of her daughter Emma inside. Emma was now 15, but the photo showed her at age 8, grinning with missing front teeth after her first school play. The morning shift began like any other. Sarah checked on her assigned patients, administered medications, and coordinated with the doctors on treatment plans. She had 7 patients under her care that day, each with their own unique needs and concerns. There was Mr. Johnson, a retired construction worker who had suffered his second heart attack and was struggling to accept that his working days were over. Mrs. Kim, a school teacher who was scheduled for bypass surgery later that week and couldn't stop worrying about her students. And Tommy, a 23-year-old who had been born with a heart defect and was waiting for a transplant that might never come. Around 10 in the morning, Sarah noticed Dr. Williams, the head of the cardiac department, having what appeared to be a serious conversation with Nancy, the unit's head nurse. They kept glancing in her direction, and Sarah felt a small knot form in her stomach. She tried to focus on her work, but their whispered conversation and furtive looks made her increasingly uncomfortable. "Sarah," Nancy called out after Dr. Williams had walked away. "Could you come to my office when you have a moment?" The knot in Sarah's stomach tightened. In 12 years of working at St. Mary's, she had only been called to Nancy's office a handful of times, usually for positive reasons like performance reviews or discussions about additional responsibilities. But something about Nancy's tone and the way she avoided eye contact suggested this would be different. Sarah finished administering medication to Mrs. Patterson and made sure all her patients were comfortable before walking to Nancy's office. The small room was cramped with filing cabinets, medical journals, and a desk covered in paperwork. Nancy sat behind the desk, looking more uncomfortable than Sarah had ever seen her. "Please, sit down," Nancy said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Her voice was strained, and she kept fidgeting with a pen. Sarah sat down, her mind racing through possibilities. Had she made a mistake with a patient? Had someone complained about her care? She couldn't think of anything she had done wrong, but the atmosphere in the room suggested serious trouble. "Sarah, I need to discuss something important with you," Nancy began, still avoiding direct eye contact. As you know, the hospital has been going through some financial difficulties lately. The administration has been forced to make some very difficult decisions about staffing. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She felt her breath catch in her throat as the reality of what Nancy was about to say became clear. The email about budget restructuring suddenly took on a much more personal meaning. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but your position is being eliminated effective at the end of this week," Nancy continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Friday will be your last day." Sarah stared at Nancy, unable to process what she had just heard. 12 years of dedicated service, countless nights staying late to comfort frightened patients, weekends spent covering for sick colleagues, and it all meant nothing in the face of a budget spreadsheet. "But I don't understand," Sarah finally managed to say. "My performance reviews have always been excellent. Just last month, you told me I was one of your most reliable nurses." Nancy's face flushed red, and she finally looked directly at Sarah. "This isn't about your performance, Sarah. You're an excellent nurse, one of the best I've worked with. But the administration is eliminating several positions, and, unfortunately, yours is one of them." "Why me?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. At 42, with 12 years of experience, she was earning significantly more than the younger nurses. From a purely financial perspective, the hospital could replace her with 2 new graduates for the same cost. Nancy's silence confirmed Sarah's suspicion. The decision had nothing to do with her skills, dedication, or the relationships she had built with patients and colleagues. It was simply a matter of numbers on a balance sheet. "What about my patients?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Mrs. Patterson doesn't trust anyone else. Tommy has been asking me about college programs for people with heart conditions. Mr. Johnson finally opened up to me yesterday about his fears." "The other nurses will take good care of them," Nancy replied, but her words sounded hollow even to her own ears. They both knew that the connection Sarah had built with her patients couldn't simply be transferred to someone else. Sarah sat in stunned silence for several minutes, trying to absorb the magnitude of what had just happened. This job wasn't just her source of income, it was her identity, her purpose, her contribution to the world. She had always taken pride in being able to ease people's suffering during some of the most frightening moments of their lives. "Is there any possibility of appeal or reconsideration?" Sarah asked, grasping for any hope. Nancy shook her head sadly. "The decision comes from the hospital board. It's final." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she refused to cry in Nancy's office. She had maintained her professionalism for 12 years, and she wouldn't let it crumble now, even in the face of such devastating news. "I'll need you to work through Friday to help with the transition," Nancy continued. "We'll provide you with a positive letter of recommendation, and HR will discuss your benefits and final paycheck with you before you leave." Sarah nodded numbly and stood up from the chair. Her legs felt unsteady, as if the ground beneath her had shifted. Everything she had believed about loyalty, hard work, and dedication had been shattered in the span of a 10-minute conversation. As she walked back to the cardiac unit, Sarah felt the eyes of her colleagues on her. Word traveled fast in hospitals, and she suspected that several people already knew about her termination. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed relieved that it hadn't been them, and a few appeared genuinely shocked. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Sarah went through the motions of caring for her patients, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about Emma, who was counting on her mother's steady income to pay for college in a few years. She thought about her mortgage, her car payments, and all the other financial obligations that wouldn't pause just because she had lost her job. Most of all, she thought about her patients and how she would explain her sudden departure to them. Mrs. Patterson had already formed a strong attachment to Sarah and trusted her completely. How could she tell an elderly, frightened woman that she was being abandoned because of budget cuts? When her shift ended that evening, Sarah sat in her car in the parking lot for a long time. She watched other staff members coming and going, living their normal lives while her world had been turned upside down. She thought about calling her sister or her best friend to share the news, but she wasn't ready to say the words out loud yet. Finally, she drove home to the small house she had bought 7 years ago, dreaming of the stability it would provide for her and Emma. As she pulled into the driveway, she saw Emma through the living room window, doing homework at the dining table. Her daughter looked up and waved, unaware that their lives had just become much more uncertain. That night, Sarah lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She kept replaying the conversation with Nancy, wondering if there had been any signs she had missed, any way she could have prepared for this devastating blow. The injustice of it all burned in her chest like a physical pain. She had given the best years of her career to St. Mary's Hospital. She had missed Emma's school place to cover for sick colleagues, worked through her own illnesses to ensure her patients received proper care, and stayed late countless nights to comfort frightened families. None of that seemed to matter now. As the hours passed, Sarah's shock began to give way to a deep sadness. She wasn't just losing a job, she was losing her identity as a healer, her sense of purpose, and her belief that dedication and compassion were valued in the world. The realization that she was essentially disposable, despite years of exemplary service, cut deeper than any physical wound. The next morning, Sarah woke up with swollen eyes and a heavy heart. She had 3 more days to say goodbye to the life she had built, 3 more days to pretend that everything was normal while her world crumbled around her. She dressed carefully, applied makeup to hide the evidence of her sleepless night, and prepared to face another day in the job she was about to lose. As she drove to the hospital, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would finish these last few days with the same professionalism and compassion she had always shown. Her patients deserved nothing less, even if the hospital administration had failed to show her the same consideration. Whatever happened next, she would leave St. Mary's with her dignity intact. The next 3 days at St. Mary's Hospital felt like living in a strange dream. Sarah moved through her routine with mechanical precision, but everything seemed different now that she knew it was ending. Every interaction with patients, every conversation with colleagues, every moment spent in the cardiac unit carried the weight of finality. Wednesday morning brought its own challenges. Mrs. Patterson was scheduled for a follow-up procedure, and she was even more anxious than usual. The elderly woman had specifically requested that Sarah be present during the preparation, clinging to the familiar comfort that Sarah provided. "I don't know what I would do without you, dear," Mrs. Patterson said as Sarah helped her into the hospital gown. Her hands were shaking, not just from her medical condition but from genuine fear. "You're the only one who explains things in a way I can understand." Sarah felt a sharp pain in her chest as she looked into the woman's trusting eyes. How could she tell someone who was already scared and vulnerable that she would be gone by the end of the week? The thought of abandoning Mrs. Patterson felt like a betrayal of everything she believed about nursing. "You're going to do just fine," Sarah said softly, holding the woman's hand. "The procedure is routine, and Dr. Rodriguez is excellent at what he does. But you'll be here when I wake up, won't you?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice small and uncertain. Sarah squeezed the woman's hand gently, unable to make a promise she couldn't keep. "The nursing staff will take excellent care of you," she said, choosing her words carefully. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either, and the deception made her feel sick. Meanwhile, Tommy, the young man waiting for a heart transplant, had been asking Sarah about her own career path. He was interested in maybe working in healthcare himself someday, inspired by the compassion he had witnessed during his extended stay. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that someone was looking up to her and considering healthcare as a calling just as she was being forced out of it. "What made you want to become a nurse?" Tommy asked during one of their conversations that afternoon. Sarah sat down in the chair beside his bed, remembering her younger self with a mixture of nostalgia and sadness. "I wanted to make a difference in people's lives," she said honestly. "When people are sick and scared, sometimes just having someone who cares can make all the difference in their healing." "Do you still feel that way?" Tommy asked with the kind of direct honesty that only comes from facing one's own mortality at a young age. Sarah paused, considering how to answer. 3 days ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. Now, she wasn't sure what she felt. "I believe in the importance of compassionate care," she finally said. "But sometimes the system makes it difficult to provide the kind of care that patients really need." Tommy nodded thoughtfully. Despite his youth, his experience with chronic illness had given him insights that many healthy people twice his age didn't possess. "You mean like when hospitals care more about money than people?" The simple truth of his statement hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. "Something like that," she said quietly. As the day progressed, Sarah found herself paying attention to details she had previously taken for granted. The way afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of the patient rooms, creating patterns on the floor that shifted throughout the day. The sound of her colleagues' voices discussing treatment plans with genuine concern for their patients. The grateful smiles of family members when she took an extra moment to explain a medical procedure. She realized that despite the administrative betrayal she was experiencing, the actual work of nursing still brought her deep satisfaction. Every time she eased a patient's pain, answered a frightened question, or simply provided a comforting presence during a difficult moment, she felt a sense of purpose that no corporate decision could take away from her. That evening, Sarah finally told Emma about losing her job. They were sitting at the kitchen table, sharing a simple dinner of pasta and salad, when Sarah realized she couldn't keep the secret any longer. Her daughter deserved to know that their lives were about to change dramatically. "Emma, I need to tell you something important," Sarah began, setting down her fork. Her 15-year-old daughter looked up from her homework, immediately sensing the seriousness in her mother's tone. Emma had inherited Sarah's intuitive ability to read people's emotions, a gift that served her well in her relationships but also meant she often picked up on things others tried to hide. "What's wrong?" Emma asked, closing her textbook. "I'm losing my job at the hospital," Sarah said simply. "Friday will be my last day." Emma stared at her mother in shock. "What? Why? Did something happen?" Sarah explained the situation as calmly as she could, emphasizing that it wasn't her fault and that the decision was purely financial. She watched her daughter's face cycle through confusion, anger, and worry as the implications became clear. "But you love that job," Emma said, her voice small. "And you're so good at it. All those thank you cards from patients prove it." Sarah looked toward the refrigerator, where dozens of cards and photos from grateful patients had accumulated over the years. Each one represented a life she had touched, a moment of comfort she had provided, a human connection that had made a difference. The collection was a testament to 12 years of meaningful work that was about to end abruptly. "Sometimes life doesn't make sense," Sarah said, reaching across the table to take her daughter's hand. "But we'll figure it out. I'll find another job, maybe even a better one." "What about college?" Emma asked, voicing the concern that had been weighing on both their minds. She was a straight-A student with dreams of studying environmental science, but those dreams required financial resources that had suddenly become uncertain. "We'll make it work," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "You're going to college, Emma. I promise you that." That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah sat at her laptop researching job opportunities in the area. The healthcare job market was competitive, and many positions required specific certifications she didn't have. The few openings that matched her experience offered significantly lower salaries than what she had been earning at St. Mary's. She also spent time updating her resume, a document she hadn't touched in over a decade. As she wrote about her accomplishments and responsibilities, Sarah felt a renewed sense of pride in her professional achievements. She had genuinely excelled in her role, earning recognition from patients, colleagues, and supervisors alike. The hospital might not value her contributions anymore, but the evidence of her competence was undeniable. Thursday arrived with a mixture of anxiety and determination. Sarah had decided to begin saying goodbye to her patients, though she still struggled with how to explain her departure without causing additional distress. She started with Mr. Johnson, the retired construction worker who had been making steady progress in his recovery. "Mr. Johnson, I wanted to let you know that Friday will be my last day here," she said during her morning rounds. "But I'm confident that you're going to continue doing well with your recovery." Mr. Johnson looked shocked. "You're leaving? But why? Did we do something wrong?" The assumption that patients might be somehow responsible for her departure broke Sarah's heart. "No, you've all been wonderful," she assured him. The hospital is making some changes, and my position is being eliminated. It has nothing to do with any of you. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard, Mr. Johnson said bluntly. You're the best nurse in this place. Who's going to take care of us? Sarah spent several minutes reassuring him that the other nurses were highly skilled and would provide excellent care. But she could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the same fear she had observed in Mrs. Patterson and her other patients. They weren't just losing a healthcare provider, they were losing someone they had learned to trust during one of the most vulnerable periods of their lives. By Thursday afternoon, word of Sarah's termination had spread throughout the cardiac unit. Several colleagues approached her privately to express their shock and sympathy. Many seemed nervous, realizing that if someone with Sarah's experience and reputation could be let go so suddenly, none of them were truly secure in their positions. "This is wrong, Sarah," said Dr. Rodriguez during a quiet moment between patient visits. "You're one of the most dedicated nurses I've worked with in 20 years. The administration doesn't understand what they're losing." "Thank you," Sarah replied. "That means a lot, especially coming from you." Dr. Rodriguez had been at St. Mary's longer than anyone else in the cardiac unit. He had seen numerous nurses come and go, and his respect was not given lightly. His validation of her skills and dedication provided some comfort in an otherwise devastating situation. "If you need a reference for job applications, please don't hesitate to ask," he continued. "I'll make sure any potential employer understands exactly what kind of nurse they'd be getting." Similar offers of support came from other colleagues throughout the day. Janet, the young nurse who had looked to Sarah as a mentor, was particularly upset about the news. She had been counting on Sarah's continued guidance as she developed her own skills and confidence. "I don't know how I'm going to manage without you here," Janet confided during a break. "You've taught me so much about patient care that they don't cover in nursing school." "You're going to do just fine," Sarah assured her. "You have good instincts and a caring heart. Those are the most important qualities in nursing." As Thursday evening approached, Sarah realized she had been unconsciously memorizing details about her workplace. The way the elevator buttons felt under her fingers, the particular squeak of the supply room door, the view of the parking lot from the break room window. These small sensory memories would soon be all she had left of a place that had defined her adult life. She also found herself thinking about the patients she would never see again. Mrs. Patterson would have her procedure and, hopefully, recover well, but Sarah wouldn't be there to celebrate with her or provide comfort if complications arose. Tommy would continue waiting for a heart transplant, but Sarah wouldn't be there to encourage him during the difficult days or share in his joy if a donor was found. The personal relationships she had built with patients had always been one of the most rewarding aspects of nursing. Unlike many other professions where customer relationships were brief and transactional, nursing involved caring for people during extended periods of vulnerability and fear. The bonds formed in those circumstances were often deep and meaningful, making the forced separation even more painful. That evening, Sarah spent extra time with Emma, helping her with homework and talking about her day at school. She wanted to provide as much stability and normalcy as possible while their lives were in transition. Emma seemed to be handling the situation well, but Sarah knew her daughter was probably more worried than she let on. Before going to bed, Sarah stood in her bedroom looking at the uniform hanging in her closet for what would be one of the last times. The simple white top and navy pants had been like armor for 12 years, representing her professional identity and the respect that came with being a skilled healthcare provider. Tomorrow would be her final day wearing them at St. Mary's Hospital. As she lay in bed that night, Sarah found herself thinking not about the injustice of her termination, but about all the lives she had touched during her career. Thousands of patients had benefited from her care, knowledge, and compassion. Families had found comfort in her words during their darkest hours. Colleagues had learned from her experience and dedication to excellence. The hospital administration might view her as an expendable line item on a budget report, but Sarah knew her true value couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. She had made a difference in the world, one patient at a time, and no corporate decision could diminish the importance of that contribution. With that thought providing some measure of peace, Sarah finally fell asleep, preparing herself for one last day in the job that had defined her professional life for over a decade. Friday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Sarah's mood as she drove to St. Mary's Hospital for the final time as an employee. The familiar route through the city streets felt different now, like she was seeing everything through a lens of finality. Traffic lights, buildings, and intersections that had been routine landmarks for 12 years suddenly seemed significant because she wouldn't be traveling this path every day anymore. Sarah had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with a mixture of sadness, anger, and uncertainty about the future. She had alternated between feeling sorry for herself and trying to maintain the positive attitude that had always served her well in difficult situations. By morning, she had resolved to make her last day a tribute to everything she valued about nursing, regardless of how the hospital administration had treated her. She arrived earlier than usual, wanting to spend extra time with each of her patients before the shift officially began. The parking lot was still mostly empty, and she sat in her car for a few minutes, gathering the emotional strength she would need to get through the day. The gray sky seemed to press down on the world, creating an atmosphere that perfectly matched her internal state. Walking through the sliding glass doors of St. Mary's for the last time felt surreal. Every step through the familiar corridors was weighted with memory and loss. Sarah passed the coffee shop where she had grabbed countless quick breakfasts, the elevator where she had shared jokes and concerns with colleagues, and the nurse's station that had been the center of her professional universe. "Good morning, Sarah," called Maria, the cleaning lady who had greeted her with warmth for years. "How are you feeling today?" Sarah realized that Maria probably didn't know about her termination. Unlike the medical staff who gossiped and shared information constantly, the support staff often remained outside the loop of administrative decisions. Sarah considered telling her the truth but decided against it. There was no point in spreading sadness to someone who had always brought such positivity to their brief interactions. "I'm doing well, Maria. How's your grandson doing with his soccer team?" They chatted for a few minutes about family and weekend plans, maintaining the normal rhythm of their relationship even though Sarah knew this would likely be their last conversation. When Maria moved on to continue her cleaning duties, Sarah felt another small pang of loss for the dozens of small relationships that would end along with her job. At the nurse's station, Sarah found a small stack of cards waiting for her. Word had apparently spread beyond the cardiac unit about her termination, and several patients from other departments had sent notes expressing their gratitude for care she had provided in the past. Reading through them, Sarah was reminded of cases she had handled over the years, people whose lives she had touched during brief but significant moments. One card was from Mrs. Williams, an elderly woman who had been Sarah's patient 3 years ago during a complicated recovery from heart surgery. The woman had been difficult and demanding, frustrating many of the staff, but Sarah had taken the time to understand that her behavior came from fear and loneliness. The card included a photo of Mrs. Williams at her granddaughter's wedding, an event she had lived to see because of the excellent care she received at St. Mary's. Another note came from the family of Mr. Fernandez, a man who had died 2 years ago after a massive heart attack. Sarah had stayed with the family during his final hours, explaining the medical situation with honesty and compassion while helping them navigate their grief. The card thanked her for making an unbearable situation more bearable through her presence and kindness. Each card represented a story, a human connection, a moment when Sarah's skills and compassion had made a real difference in someone's life. Reading through them, she felt a renewed sense of pride in her chosen profession, even as she prepared to be forced out of it. Dr. Rodriguez found her at the nurse's station and handed her an envelope. "From all of us in the department," he said quietly. "We wanted you to know how much we'll miss working with you." Inside was a card signed by every doctor, nurse, and technician in the cardiac unit, along with a gift certificate to her favorite restaurant. The messages ranged from professional acknowledgments of her skills to personal notes about the friendship and mentorship she had provided. Several people had written about specific cases where her expertise and dedication had made crucial differences in patient outcomes. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "This means more to me than you know." "We're all going to miss you," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "And, frankly, we're all a little scared about what this means for the future of the unit. You've been the backbone of this place for so long." His comment highlighted something Sarah had been thinking about but hadn't wanted to voice. Her termination wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a loss for the entire cardiac unit and, ultimately, for the patients who would be treated there. The hospital administration's focus on short-term cost savings ignored the long-term impact of losing experienced, skilled staff members. As her shift officially began, Sarah threw herself into patient care with even more intensity than usual. She wanted her final day to exemplify everything she believed nursing should be: thorough, compassionate, and focused entirely on the needs of the people under her care. Mrs. Patterson was recovering well from her procedure, but she was still anxious about her ongoing treatment plan. Sarah spent extra time explaining each medication, writing down instructions in simple language, and reassuring the woman about her prognosis. She also made sure Mrs. Patterson understood which doctors and nurses would be responsible for her care going forward. "I have something to tell you," Sarah finally said, sitting down beside the woman's bed. "Today is my last day working at the hospital." Mrs. Patterson's face crumpled with disappointment and worry. "Oh no, dear. Are you moving to another hospital? Can I transfer to wherever you're going?" Sarah gently explained that she was being laid off due to budget cuts, not moving to another position. She watched Mrs. Patterson process this information, seeing the fear return to her eyes as she realized she would have to navigate the rest of her treatment without the nurse who had become her anchor in an uncertain situation. "But who will take care of me?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice small and frightened. "Janet is an excellent nurse," Sarah assured her. "She's young, but she has wonderful instincts and a caring heart. I've been training her, and I know she'll take good care of you." Sarah spent the next hour introducing Mrs. Patterson to Janet, explaining the woman's specific needs and fears, and helping to establish the beginning of trust between patient and new nurse. It was heartbreaking to see Mrs. Patterson's reluctance to accept this transition, but Sarah knew it was necessary for the woman's continued well-being. Tommy, the young man waiting for a heart transplant, took the news of Sarah's departure with the philosophical acceptance that seemed to come naturally to people who had faced their own mortality. "That's messed up," he said bluntly. "But I guess it's just another example of how the world doesn't always make sense." "What will you do now?" he asked. "I'm not sure yet," Sarah admitted. "Look for another nursing position, probably. This is what I do, who I am. I can't imagine doing anything else." "Well, wherever you end up, those patients are going to be lucky to have you," Tommy said. "You've made being stuck in this place a lot more bearable for me." As the afternoon progressed, Sarah found herself having similar conversations with each of her patients. Some were angry on her behalf, others were primarily worried about how her departure would affect their own care. All of them expressed genuine affection for her as a person, not just as a healthcare provider. Mr. Johnson, the retired construction worker, was particularly upset about the news. "This place is making a huge mistake," he declared. "You're the best nurse I've ever had, and I've been in and out of hospitals plenty of times over the years." "The other nurses here are very skilled," Sarah assured him. "You'll be in good hands." "Maybe so, but it won't be the same," Mr. Johnson replied. "You made me feel like you actually cared about what happened to me, not just whether my vitals were stable." His comment captured something essential about Sarah's approach to nursing that couldn't be easily replaced. Technical skills could be taught and procedures could be followed by any competent nurse. But the ability to make patients feel genuinely cared for as human beings, not just as medical cases, was a rarer quality that took time and experience to develop. As the end of her shift approached, Sarah completed her final documentation with extra care. She wrote detailed notes about each patient's condition, concerns, and specific needs. She wanted to leave her colleagues with as much information as possible to ensure continuity of care, even though she knew that some things couldn't be communicated in written form. The personal relationship she had built with patients, the trust they had placed in her, and the deep understanding she had developed of their individual personalities and fears, these intangible aspects of nursing care couldn't be passed along through documentation. They would have to be rebuilt from scratch by whoever took over her responsibilities. Nancy, the head nurse, appeared at the nurse's station as Sarah was finishing her paperwork. "Sarah, when you're done with your notes, could you stop by HR to take care of your exit paperwork?" The administrative aspects of leaving felt cold and impersonal after the emotional intensity of saying goodbye to patients and colleagues. Sarah nodded and gathered her belongings from her locker for the last time. The small space that had held her personal items for 12 years looked empty and sad, with just a few remaining items scattered on the shelves. She took down the photo of Emma from the inside of the locker door, remembering all the times she had looked at her daughter's smiling face during difficult days at work. Emma had grown up so much since that photo was taken, and Sarah had missed many moments of her daughter's childhood because of her dedication to her job. Now that the job was ending, she tried to find some comfort in the idea that she might have more time to spend with Emma during these important teenage years. The walk to the HR department felt like a march to her own execution. Sarah had to sign several forms acknowledging her termination, return her hospital ID badge and security access card, and collect information about her final paycheck and benefits continuation. The HR representative was polite but businesslike, treating Sarah's termination as just another administrative task to be completed efficiently. "Is there anything else you need from me?" the HR representative asked as Sarah finished signing the last form. Sarah wanted to say something about the injustice of her termination, about the years of dedicated service that were being disregarded, about the impact her loss would have on patient care. But she recognized that the young woman sitting across from her had no power to change anything and was just doing her job. "No, I think that covers everything," Sarah replied quietly. As she left the HR office, Sarah realized she was no longer officially an employee of St. Mary's Hospital. Her access cards had been deactivated, her email account would be closed, and her name would be removed from the staff directory. After 12 years of being an integral part of the cardiac unit, she had been reduced to a former employee in the span of a few signatures. The cardiac unit staff had organized a small goodbye gathering in the break room. Someone had brought a cake, and several people had stayed past the end of their shifts to say farewell. The atmosphere was a mixture of celebration and mourning, acknowledging Sarah's contributions while recognizing the loss her departure represented. "Speech!" "Speech," called out one of the younger nurses, but Sarah shook her head with a smile. "I'm not good at speeches," she said. "But I want you all to know that working with you has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. Take care of each other, and take care of our patients. That's what matters most." As her colleagues began to drift away to their own responsibilities, Sarah found herself alone in the break room that had been a refuge for thousands of brief moments over the years. She looked out the window at the parking lot where her car sat waiting, representing the bridge between her old life and whatever came next. The afternoon sun had finally broken through the gray clouds, casting long shadows across the pavement and illuminating the world with a golden light that seemed to promise better days ahead. Sarah took a deep breath, gathered her belongings, and prepared to walk out of St. Mary's Hospital for the last time as an employee, carrying with her 12 years of memories and the unshakable knowledge that she had made a difference in countless lives. The weeks following Sarah's departure from St. Mary's Hospital felt like living in someone else's life. For the first time in 12 years, she woke up each morning without a specific place to be or people depending on her care. The sudden absence of routine and purpose left her feeling unmoored, like a ship that had lost its anchor in familiar waters. The first Monday after her termination, Sarah woke up automatically at 5:30, her body still programmed to prepare for a 6:30 shift at the hospital. She lay in bed for several minutes, listening to the familiar sounds of early morning, birds beginning their dawn chorus, the distant hum of traffic as the city slowly awakened, the soft breathing of Emma still sleeping in the next room. But, instead of feeling peaceful, the quiet felt oppressive, a reminder that she no longer had a vital role to play in the world. Emma had been remarkable throughout the crisis, showing a maturity beyond her 15 years. She had quietly taken on additional household responsibilities, doing her own laundry and preparing simple meals when Sarah was too overwhelmed to manage normal tasks. The teenager's resilience and support provided some comfort, but it also made Sarah feel guilty that her daughter was being forced to grow up too quickly because of circumstances beyond their control. "Mom, you don't have to pretend to be okay all the time," Emma had said one evening when she found Sarah staring blankly at job listings on her laptop. "I know this is really hard for you." Sarah looked up at her daughter, struck by the wisdom in those young eyes. "I'm supposed to be taking care of you, not the other way around," she replied. "We take care of each other," Emma said simply. "That's what families do." The job search proved more challenging than Sarah had anticipated. Despite her 12 years of experience and excellent references, many positions required certifications or specialized training that she didn't possess. The healthcare industry had evolved significantly during her time at St. Mary's, with new technologies and treatment protocols that were unfamiliar to her. What had once felt like an asset, her deep experience in cardiac nursing, now sometimes seemed limiting in a job market that valued versatility and cutting-edge knowledge. Several potential employers were interested in her application, but the interviews often ended with polite rejections that focused on her overqualification for available positions. Sarah understood the code. They couldn't afford to pay someone with her experience, just as St. Mary's had decided they couldn't afford to keep her. The financial pressure mounted steadily. Sarah's savings account, which had been modest but adequate for emergencies, began to dwindle as mortgage payments, utilities, and daily expenses continued without interruption. She applied for unemployment benefits but found the process frustrating and the payments insufficient to cover their basic needs. One particularly difficult day, Sarah found herself standing in the grocery store, calculating the cost of every item in her cart and putting back things that weren't absolutely necessary. A jar of Emma's favorite peanut butter, a small luxury they had always taken for granted, suddenly seemed like an unaffordable extravagance. The realization that she couldn't provide her daughter with simple pleasures hit her harder than any corporate termination notice. "Mom, we don't need the name brand," Emma said gently when she noticed Sarah hesitating over the peanut butter. "The store brand tastes fine." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes at her daughter's understanding and acceptance. Emma shouldn't have to worry about the cost of peanut butter, shouldn't have to accommodate their reduced circumstances with such grace. The teenager's maturity was admirable but also heartbreaking, evidence of innocence lost too early. As the weeks passed, Sarah began to expand her job search beyond traditional nursing positions. She looked into roles in medical education, pharmaceutical sales, and healthcare administration. Each possibility required her to reimagine her professional identity, to find ways to translate her clinical experience into different contexts. The sense of professional identity crisis went deeper than just finding new employment. Sarah had defined herself as a nurse for so long that losing that role felt like losing a fundamental part of who she was. When people asked what she did for work, she found herself struggling to answer. Was she still a nurse if she wasn't actively practicing? Was she unemployed, or was she between positions? The uncertainty about her professional status reflected a deeper confusion about her place in the world. During this difficult period, Sarah received unexpected support from former colleagues and patients. Dr. Rodriguez called regularly to check on her job search and offer professional references. Janet, the young nurse who had looked to Sarah as a mentor, sent text messages with updates about the cardiac unit and shared how much everyone missed her presence. Most surprisingly, several former patients reached out to express their gratitude and concern. Mrs. Patterson called twice, once to share that her recovery was progressing well and once simply to check on how Sarah was doing. The elderly woman's concern for her former nurse's welfare was touching, a reversal of their typical relationship that highlighted the genuine human connections that had developed during their professional interactions. "I've been praying for you every day," Mrs. Patterson said during one of their phone conversations. "You took such good care of me when I was scared and alone. I want to make sure someone is taking care of you now." These expressions of ongoing connection and care provided emotional sustenance during a difficult time, reminding Sarah that her work had created lasting positive impacts that extended beyond her employment status. The relationships she had built through nursing weren't terminated along with her job, they had become part of the fabric of her life in ways that no corporate decision could undo. Tommy, the young man waiting for a heart transplant, sent her a handwritten letter that arrived on a particularly discouraging day. His letter was filled with updates about his condition and thoughtful reflections on their conversations during his hospitalization. "I keep thinking about what you said about making a difference in people's lives," he wrote. "You definitely made a difference in mine, and I wanted you to know that whatever happens next in your career, you're going to keep making a difference because that's just who you are." The letter arrived on the same day that Sarah received her third rejection for a position she had felt optimistic about. Reading Tommy's words reminded her that her value as a person and as a healthcare provider wasn't determined by employment status or corporate decisions. The difference she had made in his life, and in the lives of countless other patients, was a permanent part of the world regardless of what happened in her job search. As autumn progressed, Sarah began volunteering at a free clinic in a low-income neighborhood across town. The work was unpaid, but it allowed her to use her nursing skills while contributing to her community. The clinic served people who couldn't afford regular healthcare, providing basic medical services and health education to families who might otherwise go without care. The volunteer work reminded Sarah of why she had originally been drawn to nursing. Stripped of the bureaucratic complexities and corporate pressures that had increasingly characterized healthcare at St. Mary's, the clinic focused purely on meeting human needs with available resources. Every patient was grateful for the care they received, understanding that the volunteers were there purely out of a desire to help rather than financial obligation. Working with Dr. Martinez, a retired physician who had founded the clinic 5 years earlier, Sarah rediscovered the satisfaction of practicing nursing in its most fundamental form. Without the pressure of insurance requirements, corporate policies, and administrative oversight, she could focus entirely on assessment, care, and education. The work was often challenging due to limited resources, but it was also deeply fulfilling in ways that her hospital job had not been in recent years. "You have excellent instincts, Dr. Martinez told her after she had been volunteering for several weeks. "Have you ever considered working in community health or public health nursing?" The suggestion opened up possibilities Sarah hadn't previously considered. Community health nursing involved working with populations rather than individual patients, focusing on prevention and education rather than acute care. It was a different application of nursing skills, but one that aligned with her growing interest in addressing healthcare inequities and systemic problems. Sarah began researching community health nursing programs and certification requirements. The field offered opportunities to work with underserved populations, develop health education programs, and advocate for policy changes that could improve healthcare access. It would require additional education and training, but it represented a way to rebuild her career around the values that had drawn her to nursing in the first place. The possibility of returning to school felt both exciting and daunting. At 42, Sarah would be significantly older than most of her classmates, and the financial investment seemed risky given their current circumstances. But the more she learned about community health nursing, the more convinced she became that it might be the right path forward. Emma was enthusiastic about her mother's interest in returning to school. "You're always telling me that education is important and that it's never too late to learn new things," she said. "Maybe this is your chance to practice what you preach." The practical challenges remained significant. Graduate school would require tuition payments they couldn't afford, and most programs were full-time, which would make it difficult to work while studying. Sarah began investigating financial aid options, scholarship programs, and part-time degree possibilities. As winter approached, Sarah felt a shift in her perspective about the termination from St. Mary's Hospital. What had initially felt like a devastating blow to her life and career was beginning to seem like an opportunity to reassess her professional goals and pursue work that aligned more closely with her values. The forced break from traditional hospital nursing had allowed her to remember what she loved most about healthcare and to envision ways of contributing that she hadn't previously considered. The financial stress remained real and pressing, but Sarah felt a growing sense of possibility about the future. The volunteer work at the clinic had restored her confidence in her abilities and reminded her that nursing was much broader than any single job or institution. Her skills, experience, and passion for helping others were portable assets that could be applied in many different contexts. Late one evening, as Sarah sat at her kitchen table researching graduate programs and scholarship opportunities, she realized that she felt hopeful about the future for the first time since her termination. The path forward wasn't clear or easy, but it was emerging. Whatever came next would be built on a foundation of 12 years of excellent nursing practice, a deep commitment to helping others, and a renewed understanding of her own resilience and adaptability. The forced transition from St. Mary's Hospital was teaching her that professional setbacks, no matter how painful, didn't have to be permanent defeats. Sometimes they could become unexpected doorways to opportunities that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah felt grateful not just for what she had lost, but for what she was beginning to discover about herself and her possibilities for the future. 6 months after her termination from St. Mary's Hospital, Sarah stood at the window of her small apartment, watching as 3 helicopters circled overhead before landing in the field behind her building. The thunderous sound of rotating blades filled the air, and she could see medical personnel rushing around the aircraft with practiced urgency. It was a sight that would have been routine during her hospital days, but now it filled her with a mixture of curiosity and melancholy. The apartment was temporary housing that Sarah had been forced to accept after losing her house to foreclosure 2 months earlier. Despite her best efforts to find stable employment, the combination of limited job opportunities and mounting expenses had made it impossible to keep up with mortgage payments. The small 2-bedroom unit was clean and safe, but it represented everything she had lost in the aftermath of her termination. Emma had handled the move with the same remarkable maturity she had shown throughout their financial crisis. At 16 now, she had grown into a young woman who understood that life sometimes delivered unexpected hardships that required adaptation and resilience. She had given up her own room to share the small living space, packed her belongings without complaint, and even helped her mother sort through years of accumulated possessions to decide what could fit in their reduced circumstances. "It's just a place to live," Emma had said pragmatically as they moved their remaining furniture into the apartment. "Home is wherever we're together." The words had brought tears to Sarah's eyes, both for the wisdom they contained and for the loss of innocence they represented. No 16-year-old should have to comfort her mother about losing their family home, shouldn't have to be so philosophical about reduced circumstances that weren't her fault. Sarah's job search had evolved significantly over the months. After numerous rejections for traditional nursing positions, she had expanded her search to include roles in healthcare education, case management, and public health. She had also pursued additional certifications online, using her limited savings to invest in skills that might make her more competitive in a changing healthcare market. The volunteer work at the free clinic had become a lifeline, providing not just a sense of purpose but also valuable networking opportunities. Dr. Martinez had introduced her to other healthcare professionals working in community health, and, slowly, Sarah had begun to build relationships that might eventually lead to paid employment. 3 weeks earlier, she had interviewed for a position with the county health department as a community health coordinator. The job would involve developing health education programs, coordinating care for vulnerable populations, and working with local organizations to address health disparities. It wasn't traditional bedside nursing, but it would allow her to use her clinical knowledge and experience to make a broader impact on community health. The interview had gone well, and Sarah felt cautiously optimistic about her chances. The position paid less than what she had earned at St. Mary's, but it would be enough to stabilize their finances and potentially move to a better living situation. More importantly, the work aligned with values she had rediscovered during her months of unemployment and volunteer service. As she watched the helicopters outside her window, Sarah found herself thinking about the emergency medical situations she had witnessed during her hospital career. Each helicopter arrival had represented someone's crisis, someone's worst day, someone's desperate need for the kind of skilled care she had spent 12 years providing. The sight reminded her of both what she missed about hospital nursing and what she had gained from being forced to explore other applications of her skills and knowledge. The sound of helicopters had always meant urgency and drama at the hospital. Now, watching from the outside, Sarah could observe the coordinated response with appreciation for the teamwork involved, but without the adrenaline and pressure of being directly responsible for patient care. The perspective was different, perhaps broader, allowing her to see the entire system of emergency response rather than just her particular role within it. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Janet, her former colleague from the cardiac unit. They had maintained regular contact, and Janet often shared updates about changes at St. Mary's Hospital. The message contained news that made Sarah's stomach tighten with a mixture of vindication and sadness. 3 more nurses laid off this week, the text read. Budget cuts continue. Unit is short-staffed and everyone is stressed. Dr. Rodriguez says patient satisfaction scores are down. We miss you every day. The news confirmed what Sarah had suspected would happen. Her termination hadn't been an isolated cost-cutting measure, but the beginning of a larger reduction in nursing staff that was affecting the quality of patient care. The irony wasn't lost on her that the hospital's pursuit of short-term financial savings was likely costing them more in the long run through reduced patient satisfaction, increased turnover, and potential liability issues. Sarah felt sad for her former colleagues who were dealing with increased workloads and stress, and especially sad for patients who were receiving less personalized care due to staffing shortages. The situation validated her growing belief that the healthcare system needed fundamental changes in how it valued and supported nursing care. Another text arrived, this one from Mrs. Patterson, the elderly patient who had formed such a strong attachment to Sarah during her cardiac treatment. The woman had become an unexpected friend, calling occasionally to check on Sarah's well-being and share updates about her own health. "Thinking of you today," the message read. "Hope you're doing well. You're in my prayers." The ongoing connection with former patients had been one of the most surprising and meaningful aspects of Sarah's post-hospital experience. She had discovered that the relationships formed during nursing care often transcended the professional context, becoming genuine human connections that continued beyond the clinical setting. Tommy, the young man who had been waiting for a heart transplant, had received his new heart 3 months after Sarah's departure. She had learned about his successful surgery through the hospital grapevine, and they had exchanged several messages about his recovery. His experience had reinforced her belief in the importance of hope and human connection in the healing process. As the helicopters outside her window finally powered down and the medical teams dispersed, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had defined herself entirely by her job at St. Mary's Hospital. The termination had felt like the end of her professional identity, a rejection of everything she had worked to build over 12 years of dedicated service. Now, she understood that losing that job had been painful but not devastating in the way she had initially feared. Her skills as a nurse, her knowledge of healthcare, and her ability to connect with people in need were portable assets that couldn't be terminated by any corporate decision. The forced break from traditional hospital nursing had allowed her to explore other ways of contributing to healthcare and discover aspects of the field she had never previously considered. The volunteer work at the free clinic had shown her the satisfaction of providing care based purely on human need rather than insurance coverage or profit margins. The community health position she was hoping to secure would allow her to address systemic health issues and work on prevention rather than just treating illness after it occurred. Emma appeared in the doorway, having finished her homework for the evening. "What was all that noise?" she asked, looking toward the window where the helicopters had landed. "Some kind of emergency medical situation," Sarah replied. "Multiple helicopters usually means something serious." They stood together at the window for a moment, watching the last of the emergency personnel pack up their equipment. Emma had grown taller over the past months, and Sarah realized that her daughter was becoming a young adult with her own perspectives and insights about the world. "Do you miss it?" Emma asked quietly. "Working in the hospital, I mean." Sarah considered the question carefully. "I miss some parts of it," she said honestly. "I miss the patients, and the feeling of making a direct difference in someone's recovery. I miss some of my colleagues and the teamwork involved in emergency situations." "But?" Emma prompted, sensing there was more to her mother's thoughts. "But I don't miss the politics or feeling like patient care was secondary to financial concerns. And I've learned that there are other ways to help people, other ways to use nursing skills that I never considered when I was focused on bedside care." Emma nodded thoughtfully. Maybe losing that job was actually a good thing in the long run. The comment surprised Sarah with its insight. Her teenage daughter had observed something that Sarah herself was only beginning to fully understand. The termination from St. Mary's, devastating as it had been at the time, had forced her to examine her assumptions about career, identity, and success. It had led her to discover new possibilities and reconnect with the fundamental values that had drawn her to nursing in the first place. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah sat at her laptop working on a presentation she would give the following week about health literacy in underserved communities. The project was part of her volunteer work at the clinic, but it had evolved into something she was genuinely passionate about. The presentation would be delivered to a group of community organizations interested in improving health outcomes for low-income families. As she worked on slides about preventive care and health education, Sarah realized that she was using her clinical knowledge in ways she had never imagined during her hospital career. Instead of treating individual patients one at a time, she was developing programs that could potentially impact hundreds or thousands of people. The work required the same careful attention to detail and commitment to excellence that had characterized her bedside nursing, but applied on a larger scale. Her phone rang, interrupting her concentration. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something prompted her to answer. "Sarah Chen?" asked a professional-sounding woman's voice. "Yes, this is Sarah. This is Linda Walsh from the County Health Department. I'm calling about the Community Health Coordinator position you interviewed for." Sarah's heart began racing as she prepared herself for either good news or another disappointing rejection. "We were very impressed with your background and interview," Linda continued. "We'd like to offer you the position, if you're still interested." Sarah felt a wave of relief and excitement wash over her. After months of uncertainty and financial stress, she finally had a path forward. "Yes, I'm definitely still interested," she managed to say. They discussed salary, benefits, and start date, and Sarah found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. The position would allow them to move to a better apartment, reduce the financial pressure that had been weighing on both her and Emma, and, most importantly, give her a chance to rebuild her career around work that felt meaningful and aligned with her values. After ending the call, Sarah sat quietly for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened. The job offer represented more than just employment, it was validation that her skills and experience had value, that her forced departure from St. Mary's wasn't the end of her professional story but a transition to a new chapter. She looked toward Emma's bedroom, eager to share the good news but deciding to wait until morning to wake her daughter with the announcement. Tomorrow would bring conversations about the future, plans for moving to a better living situation, and discussions about college applications that no longer seemed financially impossible. Outside her window, the field where the helicopters had landed was quiet now, lit only by streetlights and the distant glow of the city. Sarah thought about all the emergency situations those aircraft had responded to, all the lives that had been saved by the skilled coordination of medical teams. Tomorrow, she would begin work that was part of that same commitment to healthcare, just applied in a different context and with a different focus. The sight of the helicopter's landing had reminded her of everything she had lost when St. Mary's terminated her employment. But, sitting in her small apartment with a job offer that would change everything, Sarah realized that the helicopters had also been a symbol of the emergency response system she was about to rejoin in a new capacity. Sometimes, she thought, the most important rescues happen not in dramatic helicopter landings, but in quiet moments of human connection and community service that planted seeds for healthier futures. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah felt grateful for the difficult journey that had brought her to this point. The termination from St. Mary's had been painful and unjust, but it had also been the beginning of a transformation that led her toward work that was more aligned with her values and potentially more impactful than anything she could have imagined while confined to the routine of hospital nursing. The helicopters landing outside her window felt like a sign that her emergency was over, and her rescue was about to begin.